Welcome everyone to episode 1 of the Clinical Pearls series. So the Clinical Pearls series is where we'll go through important aspects of the GPhC exam and anything that we can take away. And these Clinical Pearls will be important to help you prepare for the GPhC Registration Assessment. So today we're going to be focusing on a very common question that I receive. And the question is, do we need to know causative organisms for the infection chapter when we're revising for the GPhC Registration Assessment? I often say yes, particularly for common conditions, but let's go through some evidence to show why it's particularly important to know the causative organisms for the GPhC Registration Assessment. So here, this was released in November of 2019, and this was released by the GPhC, and it's some sample questions to help you prepare for paper 2 of the registration assessment. Here you have a patient. What's interesting to see here is the GPhC here have split and they have made 3 questions out of 1 scenario for a patient. And this is something that could be done in the exam. So it's something that we should take into account. So here we have a patient. We have a 78-year-old man with COPD and ischemic heart disease. He's admitted to the hospital from home with a lower respiratory tract infection. You're provided with a blood pressure, which is slightly on the lower end, of 98 millimeters of mercury systolic and 58 diastolic. He has no known drug allergies and his current medication are listed below. And you can see that he's commenced on clarithromycin twice daily for the treatment of this lower respiratory tract infection. So here is where it gets interesting. Here it tells you that the microbiology results are not yet available, but an atypical pathogen is not suspected. This is very interesting as well. What is the most common cause of this man's respiratory tract infection? So this is a question provided by the GPhC, and here you've been provided with 5 different bacteria that could be, I say bacteria, and there's also 1 fungi, which we'll go through in a bit more detail. So you've got 5 different organisms here, and it's asking you the question, what's the most likely cause of this man's respiratory tract infection? And there's something that's even more important. It's also said to you, an atypical pathogen is not suspected. So the GPhC expects you to know which organisms are atypical organisms. And here, if you have an understanding of atypical organisms, you can rule out the first 3 answers. So chlamydia species, Legionella pneumophilia, as well as Mycoplasma pneumoniae, you can rule these out if you understand that they're non-culturable atypical organisms. By non-culturable, they neither conform to a gram-positive or a gram-negative form when they're tested, when this is tested in the microbiology lab. So they're non-culturable, they're atypical. So if you have an understanding of atypical organisms, you can rule out the first 3. If you have an understanding of respiratory tract infections, particularly an exacerbation of COPD or mild community-acquired pneumonia, you'll have an understanding that most commonly these will be caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae. And here you have pneumocystis species, which are normally responsible for the production of PCP pneumonia. And this is a type of fungi. This is a more serious respiratory tract infection caused by, it's normally occurs in the circumstances where a patient either has HIV or is severely immunocompromised. But at the same time, you're looking at the likely causative organism and you don't have microbiology results. So here the likely causative organism will be Streptococcus species. A very interesting question, answers a lot of questions in relation to whether you need to know the common causative organisms, whether you need to have an understanding of microbiology. If you found this useful and you want more details on microbiology related content, then I will put a link down below to the infection crash course which I deliver. Hopefully you found this useful.